you log the console into. This will automatically be filled in from when you've run the installer previously, so normally you won't even need to enter it. The domain username and password is the account that will be used to actually build the machines. It's a good idea to have a dedicated account for this. On most of the schools that we have set up, we've created an account usually called SOEDev or something similar, or RDMC dev, which we use to perform that. Because it's an account which should have full administrative rights over the workstations, it's a good idea to make it an account that nobody else knows about, that is just used by RDMC and by the SOE framework for its builds. Next up, you select your operating system. Now, as I've mentioned, when you install RIS, you give it a CD to copy the contents down onto the server. You can then add as many other ones as you want, and so, for example, you can have one build with Windows XP Service Pack 2, you might have another one of Windows XP with Service Pack 3, another one might be Server 2003. The current released version of the framework supports Windows XP, Windows Server 2000 and 2003. There is support in the next version, which has not been officially released yet, which adds support in for Vista and Windows 7 as well. But under the current ones, then you select the operating system build that you want here. As you can see from this list, you can also have multiple different builds under the same operating system. Normally you don't need them. We create them for testing, primarily for checking driver compatibility between different models and that kind of thing. So it will show you in the list which version of the operating system there is. And the name in brackets is actually the name of the folder that that particular operating system currently lives in. It's also worth mentioning, by the way, that you do not necessarily want to be deploying Service Pack 3 integrated as standard. The reason for this is that some types of older hardware, for reasons that we haven't really been able to determine, simply don't like Service Pack 3 to be integrated, and those machines will actually do. This is obviously majorly problematic. The funny thing is that these same machines will build fine if you install them with Windows XP Service Pack 2 and then install Service Pack 3 afterwards. And so what a lot of customers are doing, if you've got a mix of old and new machines, is create two SOEs with the framework, one based on Service Pack 2, one based on Service Pack 3. All of your newer machines you build on the Service Pack 3 build simply because it's just marginally quicker. For any older machines that simply don't like Service Pack 3, load them up with Service Pack 2 and then push out Service Pack 3 at the end. It takes a little bit longer, but that way you can get all of your machines running correctly on the current version. So select your operating system, type in the name, that's simply the name that's simply the company name that it will be registered to. The decryption key is your RDMC site decryption key. So the same key that you use when you log into RDMC, you need to specify here. It is very, very important that you get this correct because it's used both for licensing and for encryption. If it's incorrect, the build will fail in any number of rather spectacular ways. So if you're having problems, it's always a good idea to go straight in and recheck that your decryption and reset your decryption key to make sure it's correct. Okay, next up, Windows product key. If you're deploying using a select or volume license, which is always the easiest way, tick this box, specify your license key. That will be the last you need to hear about it. If you don't have access to a select or volume license key and you're using OEM or retail, tick this box. When you tick OEM retail, what it means is that a short way into the build, when Windows hits the beginning of the graphical install process, it will come up and prompt you for a key. Obviously, it's much nicer to have this done automatically, and that's where the select volume license key comes in. If you need to use a different key for each machine, select that and enter it when you're prompted. One of the biggest advantages when you're using the key up front is that after you actually initiate your build, you don't need to touch the machine at all until it's completed. The entire build process will be fully automated and there will be no interaction whatsoever on your part after you've fired it off. Unfortunately, you lose that to a certain extent when you have to use an OEM key because, as I mentioned, partway in, you need to enter the key. In this field, you set the admin password, which will be the password for the local administrative account on the Windows box. We're assuming that your machines will most likely be domain members, so obviously they'll pick up your normal domain admin accounts, etc. So that is really just for the local administrator. But again, important that you set this first off so that you don't stay with the default, and also to something so that you know what the local admin is on the machines if they're having a problem connecting to the domain. Finally, a description. In this case, we've called this one a generic framework certification. Basically, the description is the line that will come up in RIS when you go to deploy. So when you actually log into RIS, it will prompt you for which image to use, and it will be the description field that actually comes up. So make sure that you put something in there which correctly describes the particular SOE that you're installing. Now, we'll go quickly into the advanced settings. As I mentioned, most of the time you won't need to use these. As you enter information in the top fields, the bottom fields are filled out automatically. You can change them only if they need to be changed. But we'll take a quick look at what those settings actually are.
So when would you recommend that someone goes into the advanced settings?
Okay, well basically you'd use the advanced settings in a number of cases. One is if you want to create multiple builds where, for instance, you have a different application set. Let's say you wanted to create one build for teachers and one build for lab machines or things like that, then you would use the advanced interface for that. In addition, you would also potentially use these advanced settings if you don't want to use all of the default settings that the RDMC framework, that the SOE framework puts into place. These options that we'll look at in a moment. The first one that you can set is the RDMC distribution point. Under most circumstances, this will be the same share as the one that you log into with RDMC, but not necessarily. It is quite possible to have one share in which RIS holds all of its images and a completely separate share holding the RDMC files. If that's the case, if you've got two shares, make sure you tick Enable Advanced Settings and fill in the RDMC distribution point. Basically, the RIS share here is the one that the operating system and device drivers will come from. The RDMC distribution point is the one that all of your applications will come from. Now, it's also important to mention that the framework and RDMC are linked from the point of view that they share the same distribution point and they share the same application packages. That means every application package that you currently have in RDMC able to be pushed out is also accessible by the framework and can be installed as part of your base build. It also means that if you use the framework to install a new application pack, or if you add your own applications in, those will also be available to be pushed out via RDMC to existing machines. So you only ever need to define an application. Okay, a few other options here. The zip file, SOE profile and build directory. Because of time limitations, I won't go into complete detail about what the difference is, but primarily what you would use these for is, as I mentioned before, if you wanted to create a separate build for instance, lab machines. And basically what you do is simply create a new zip, create a new profile and a new build directory. And effectively what that means is you will still use a single build for Windows, so you've only got your one operating system directory, but at the end of that build they can then branch off into a different set of application and setting builds, which are defined by these particular options. Each one will appear in RIS as a separate SOE option to be installed, but they do actually share the same directory, so it doesn't take up more disk space. And again, any updates that you apply to Windows and things like that will apply to all of the builds, not just to one particular type. It's part of trying to make sure that, again, the build is unified, that you've always got a single build for all hardware types. In addition, RDMC client credentials, this is the account that the RDMC client will use to log on. So it's actually the service credentials used by the RDMC client. In most cases, these will be the same credentials that are used, that you specify for it to perform the build under. So if you've entered them up here, they will automatically be copied down here. If for any reason you want to use a different account for the RDMC client to run under, then again, set them up here. Other options that you can set, you can turn the domain join on or off. So if you hit disable, the machines will not join the domain as part of the build. Repartitioning the disk, if you specify disable, it will attempt to install the SOE using the first available partition on the disk that already exists. If it's enabled, which is the default, the entire first physical hard disk will be erased and it will create a single partition to hold the operating system. This is usually preferable because it makes sure that all of the machines are in a clean state. On the other hand, if you've got a circumstance where, for example, you like to partition your disks so that the users have their own data partition, set that to disabled. It means that when you wipe the first partition, the C drive, you can reinstall the operating system and the applications, but everything that's currently on their secondary partition will remain intact. So if they've got document files and that sort of thing, they won't be touched. NTFS file system, if you set that to disabled, the file system will be FAT32. By default, when Windows is installing, all partitions are formatted as FAT32. They're converted to NTFS at the end of the build. Okay, last up, Windows Firewall, enable or disable. By default, we disable it. If you enable it, it means that the Windows Firewall is turned on by default. This can still be overridden by group policy. Okay, we'll now quickly jump into the other major options here. This one, very easy, set background, allows you to specify the bitmap file that will be used for the background. So basically just browse to a bitmap file, import it, and that is the default backdrop that all of your machines will use. Default profile is a little bit complicated, so again we won't go into details, but basically if you want to customize things easily, you can build up a machine, log in as a local user, fire up your applications, change whatever settings you want, and then use Set Default Profile to actually pull those profile settings in from that machine, and those settings will then be automatically deployed to all of the new machines that you build. It's a slightly complicated process. All of the steps are detailed in the documentation, but it makes it very, very easy to customize the end user look and feel without having to manually put in registry keys and things like that. The SOE tag editor is used simply to allow you to label the SOE. So you can specify in here a description, for instance, of hardware type if you've made a hardware-specific build, the overall description, the time at which the build was created, the version number, major, minor, and hotfix level. So as you upgrade your SOE, make sure that you increment these so that you can keep track of which version is on each of the machines. If you decide to use the SOESoft desktop meter, which we'll look at in a moment, this information will be displayed on the desktop. It's also retrieved by the RDMC console during the inventory process, and this again allows you to keep track of what version of the SOE is out on each of the machines in the organisation. When you're finished, hit Save Configuration. Windows is ready to go. Okay, we're actually already starting to run out of time, so we'll jump into the scripting tool, which is the other major component, but a very, very easy one. The scripting tool allows you to specify for each build which applications are going to be installed. As we saw before, you can set up a separate description for each of your SOE builds, and each of those will appear in this list. Select the build, and it will show you the applications that are currently set to be installed. The box on the left contains all of the applications that you have installed, both through application packs or ones that you already had in the RDMC console. So this is basically all of your RDMC console application collections. In order to install applications, all you need to do is highlight the ones that you want, pull them from the right and pull them from the left and drop them onto the right. Typically, you want to use all of the core runtimes. That's Flash Player, Shockwave, QuickTime, Media Player, etc. To do that very easily, hold down Shift, highlight all of them, pick them up, drag them, drop them, done. That's it. Now, they will install in the order in which they appear here. You can